Dating apps for many offer the hope of meeting someone who you will get along with, and potentially much more. However, as is the case with most things, there are a few out there who spoil it for all of us. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. A couple of years ago, I had been having a lot of bad luck in the love department and decided to try one of those online dating apps. I'd been talking to a guy for a couple of weeks and we had hung out a couple of times. One day, we were just driving around when he said he wanted to go to smoke some pot at a local park and walk the trails in the woods. I had smoked before, but not often, and had several hours before I had to be at work. So I said sure, why not? We went to a nearby house. He went in and bought some of the pot, and then we drove away. After I had taken a couple of puffs, I said I was good and didn't want any more. That was when things started to go bad. He got really pushy and said that I was being a pussy when I refused. He grabbed the back of my neck and shotgunned a massive cloud of smoke into my lungs. Almost immediately I started to not feel right. As I've said before, I have smoked weed in the past and knew what being high felt like, and this wasn't it. I tried to text message my ex, who was still my best friend at the time. I messaged him, "At the park, something wrong." What was I meant to say? But it was just all jumbled. The whole time this guy is sitting there, asking me pointless and meaningless questions like, "Isn't that tree pretty? What's your favorite ice cream place?" My ex called my phone and started asking me things. "Are you okay? Should I call the police?" I told him I was fine and no, hoping he would hear the panic in my voice, as I was afraid of letting this guy know that I had tried to get help. At that point, the creep got out of the car, walked over to my side and opened the door. He said we should go for a walk and that I would feel better. I got as far as the playground and sat down. There was really no way I was willingly going to go into the woods with this guy. He kept acting like I was just really high and needed to walk it off, but I had never felt like this before. I was freezing and burning at the same time, dizzy beyond belief, and was having problems staying conscious. Just when I thought that there would be no help, a park ranger thankfully drove through the park, and I tried to wave him down, but the guy made it look like we were just waving to be friendly. Then my phone vibrated with a text. It was my ex telling me that his sister was on his way to get me and to hang on. I had never been so happy in my life. When she got there, she told him I was leaving with her, and she took me home where my ex was waiting. He took care of me the rest of the night and constantly felt like I was spinning. The next day we went back to the park to retrieve my car, and my ex told me that he had spoken to a few people that he knew, and the house that we had went to buy the pot from has been selling it laced with GHB. I got lucky that day. I was lucky enough to realize that something wasn't right, lucky to have the determination to stay conscious, and smart enough to make sure that he didn't get his hands on my phone or keys. I don't want to know what would have happened to me if he would have gotten me in those woods, and I will never use a dating app again. Number 2. I used to date a guy called Norman back in high school. I'm 29 now and have a 9-year-old daughter. So this must have been at least 12 to 13 years ago roughly. I guess we were each other's first real love/relationship. And we even wore promise rings, which was a pretty big deal back then. We talked about getting married and what our life together would be like. Basically, things people say or do when they've been together for a year as teenagers. As things go, we began to argue and fell into a cycle of breaking up and getting back together. I was immature and stupid, and I ended up getting together with another guy during one of our breakup periods. It became a messy love triangle situation, and Norman and I finished for good after I chose this other guy. Not my proudest moment, but I was 17 and stupid. Fast forward a few years, I made a Facebook account, and out of curiosity one day, I looked up Norman. We added each other on Facebook, and I messaged him, apologizing for what had happened between us. I was happily married by the time, and had just had my daughter. Norman was a good sport about it, and we remained amicable friends via social media. I really only ever spoke to him to say happy birthday, or randomly comment on a status. Another few years go by, and Norman gets into a relationship with a woman called Marissa. I was happy to see him moving on. My marriage didn't work out, but I was happy with my life and raising my daughter by myself. During Christmas one year, I found an old Polaroid picture of Norman and I that we took during a cabin weekend that we had taken together whilst we were dating. I messaged him and recalled how much fun we'd had. He didn't reply, and this was before those scene stamps. I later found out that I was no longer on his friends list. A few months later, I got a message from Marissa. She basically said that I was a whore and a slut, and that she saw the message I had sent months ago. She told me to never ever contact him again, and that I needed to get over him. She went on to say how a charm bracelet he gave me was nothing compared to what he buys her, and that I was just a cheap shag he had during high school. She said the silver promise rings were bullshit, and that he had bought her a gorgeous golden engagement ring with several diamonds. Well then, I never responded. I got off Facebook not long after for a short period of time, before remaking an entirely new profile, and adding only close friends and family. Over the next few years, I would get ads from people who I didn't know on my social media. I knew it was her, because the first account that I mistakenly added began to send me abusive messages saying I was a loser and a slut and an attention-hungry whore who would never find true love. Afterwards, I never added anyone else I didn't know personally, so I don't know how she kept finding my other accounts. She tried to add me to Instagram, Twitter, and even somehow found out my phone number and tried to add me on WhatsApp. When Snapchat became a thing, I got an ad from a user who had one of my Facebook friends' names as their username and sent me snaps of whore and bitch in cursive handwriting on paper. I kept blocking her and maintaining no contact because honestly, there was nothing else I felt I could do. This year I joined a dating app. I met a guy within the first few weeks of being on it, who I thought was amazing. His name was Nate, and he had a fair few pictures of himself. He was average looking, so it didn't raise any red flags with me that this suspiciously model looking guy was trying to talk to me. He said he had an Android phone, so he couldn't FaceTime, but we would speak on the phone regularly. It was definitely a man's voice. We texted a lot over the next few weeks, and things seemed to be going well enough for a meetup. We scheduled a time and a place a week beforehand, and he asked me about past relationships. I didn't think too much of it when he asked me about my first real relationship. He seemed keen on details and asked me if I still had feelings for my ex. I reassured him that I didn't, but that I also didn't hate him, because I was the one who messed up and he was actually a really good guy. We talked a lot about that relationship, and then he said that he was really looking forward to meeting up with me. We had chosen to meet in an outdoor cafe, because I didn't like the idea of meeting someone at my house without me actually knowing who this person was. I was so excited. It was my first online date in a long time. So imagine my confusion when I saw a woman spot me and smile and started walking over. I was too shocked to say anything when she sat down, and yes, it was Marissa. She looked so smug and said, "Hey babe," and just kept on smiling and confessed that it had all been her. At that point, I honestly just wanted to know why. What did I ever do to this chick to get all these reactions from her, and for her to actually invest her time in doing all of this for me? Basically, this is what she told me. Almost 6 years ago now, when she and Norman got together, he told her all about me and our first relationship. She went onto his friends list and saw me there, and then went through all my pictures and posts, trying to see what he saw in me. Then when I messaged him, she confronted him over why I had any pictures of me and him still, and why he needed to have me on Facebook. So he deleted me and promised to never speak to me again. She told me that she hated me and said that I was a stupid bitch who loved playing with people's emotions, and that she wanted to give me a taste of it. She said that she made up accounts so that she could just keep an eye out on me and make sure she wasn't going to be in the same city as her and Norman. She would walk by places I'd say I'd like to go to make sure I wasn't meeting up with Norman in secret. She knew where I worked through my LinkedIn, and she said the guy who I spoke to on the phone as Nate was her friend who was in on it and wanted to see me go down. She said she had originally planned to make me fall in love with Nate and then cheat on me, but she couldn't stand to wait so long. The most disturbing part, however, was when she came to my daughter. The woman had actually become extremely fixated on her, and she was convinced that she shared some of Norman's features, and became obsessed, thinking that I had a kid with him who I'd kept secret. She told me not to even think about suddenly revealing it to him in some ploy to get him back, because she would be the only one to give him a baby. I was beyond horrified. It's not very exciting at all, but all I remember was getting up from the table and telling her to never contact me again. I got in my car and just sat there in silence for a bit. The first thing I did was call my daughter's school and alert the front desk of a possible situation where someone who was neither I nor her father would try and pick her up. I called my brother afterwards and told him what happened. He urged me to call the police. I did, but ended up getting the whole spiel about how if I didn't have any documented proof about her saying these things, they couldn't help me. It's been 2 months. I haven't heard anything from her, and my brother thinks that maybe she got what she wanted by asserting herself as Norman's one and only, and now she would leave me alone. Still, I have massive paranoia when it comes to what I post on social media and where she might be lurking next. I've told my family and close friends about the situation and warned them not to add any strange profiles or people that they do not know. I told my neighbours about the situation and showed them a picture of her so that they could call the police if they saw anyone like that around the house. I wouldn't put it past her to know my address and start peeping in our windows, or worse. I've also changed all the locks as a precaution. So Marissa, let's not meet again. During my freshman and sophomore years of college, I was extremely awkward. I had just come out as gay. I didn't have any friends, and I was just generally kind of a big wad of social anxiety. Given that I didn't have any social skills to make new friends, it's not surprising that I literally had no dating experience. Miraculously, over the course of the summer after sophomore year, I just sort of grew out of the worst of my awkwardness. I lost some weight, had a lot more confidence in myself, and my self-esteem was a lot higher. I came back to school in August, and by October I had a decent amount of genuine friends, and had gotten a lot more involved on campus. With my newfound confidence, I decided I'd finally download Grindr and see what it was like. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Grindr is a gay dating app that is primarily used for finding sex hookups. Despite my recent improvements on the social arena, I was still extremely naive and inexperienced when it came to dating and sex. I set up my Grindr profile with a nice picture of myself and a very brief bio. I got a lot of messages very quickly after my picture being approved. One guy who messaged me had a display name of Dad4Young, which should have been my first red flag, but I was oblivious. I should note that I also look really young for my age. At the time I was 21, but I was regularly asked by campus staff which middle school or high school I was visiting from. I'm 23 now, and I still get asked if I want the kids menu if I go to a restaurant with my parents. It's bad. So, Dad4Young sends me a message that just says, "What's up?" and I reply without looking at his profile first. I then look at his profile and notice that he's 54. His only profile text says, "The younger, the better," and his only picture was a zoomed in blurry picture of his hairy chest. So I was not very much interested. But given my inexperience, I thought ignoring him would be horribly rude, so I kept replying. I don't really remember what we talked about in the first 10 messages we exchanged, but I do remember telling him that I was very cute. I know I told him that I was a student, but I never mentioned which college I went to. It's important to note that I went to a college in a major city, and there's also a bunch of different colleges all within a 5-mile radius of each other, and a few more within 10 miles of those. Sort of like Tinder, Grindr works based off your location, but much more precisely. If you're less than a mile or two away from someone who's online, it will display their feet in distance. I noticed that Dad4Young's profile said he was 25 miles away, which I thought was kind of far. He started getting more sexual in his chats and asked if I wanted to meet up. I felt bad flat out denying him since he'd been so polite. I told him I didn't want to meet up with him that day, but that we could keep chatting if he wanted. I figured that that was that, and when I checked 20 minutes later it said he was offline. Nope. About 30 minutes later, I got another message from him. "Hey, I got a wild hair, and thought I'd have a nice drive out to Canterbury campus." I had not told him the name of my college, nor had I told him the part of town I was in. I looked at his profile, and now it said he was 3 miles away. I started freaking out a little, and didn't reply to his message in hopes that he would just leave me alone. It's important to note that my college had a couple of different campus chunks separated by a few miles. I lived on the upperclassmen residential campus, which was around 2 miles from the main campus where all of the other student dorms and the main buildings were. I felt like if he were going to try and find me, he'd go to the main campus first, then maybe give up since not many outside people know about the separate residential campuses. 5 or 6 minutes later, I got another message saying something like, "No fun if you don't play along. What building on the residential campus are you in?" His profile now said that he was over 2,500 feet away, and every time I opened his profile, the distance would decrease. I was fully losing my shit at this point, since this guy had the ability to pinpoint my location, so I shut my blinds and turned off my lights and locked my windows. My roommate was also out of town, on some kind of retreat, so it was just me. The door was already locked, and I was getting worried. He kept sending me messages every minute or so saying things like, "I'm gonna find you. Here I come." And other supremely creepy shit like that. The distance was now just down to 310 feet, and I was completely losing my mind and didn't know what to do. So I just deleted my whole profile. Nothing else happened that night, though I was absolutely terrified he was going to come knocking at my door. Fast forward to 3 days later, I decide to re-download Grindr after doing more research and seeing that you can adjust the settings so that my exact location isn't visible. When I logged on for the first time to my remade profile, I adjusted some of the search filters until the results were specific enough to display Dad4Young's profile, which I promptly blocked. Later that evening, I get a message from someone with the display name, "We'll find you," with the same gross profile picture as Dad4Young, and my stomach sinks as he sends a flurry of messages. "You screwed up. Almost got caught by the police because of you. Couldn't find you, so I had to go to the other dorms and find someone else. He ended up calling the cops for me. I'm not giving up. I'm coming for that sweet virgin asshole." Freaked out, I blocked him again, deleted my profile again, and then deleted Grindr. I refused to re-download it or any dating apps for about a year after that, at which point I worked up the courage to try again and have not heard from this nutjob ever since. So terrifying old man with a fetish for young inexperienced guys, please, let's never meet again. Number 4. Around March 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun, and after about a week of talking, she suggested that we meet in person. She invited me to this coffee shop, and I accepted. However, that day, she started messaging me saying that she had to tell me something. Her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed he really liked talking to me, and he begged me to still meet up with him. Naturally, I declined. I blocked his profile and continued on with life. About a week later, I started speaking with another girl. Once again, she seemed really cool and fun, and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and rather stupidly I told her about my previous encounter with the man lady. Weeks later, I would realize that this new girl was the same girl as before. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I said sure as long as it were in a public place. We decided on a cafe, and the next day I sat at the table waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed and she was nowhere to be seen. I then peered out the window and saw from across the street a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds and looked back. He was still standing there staring. At that point I left the cafe, got on my bike and booked it home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but tried to pull myself together and reasoned that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my profile and things went back to normal. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up as unknown. I picked up the first few times to some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little freaked out, and after about a day, I stopped picking up any calls unless it displayed the caller's name. Then I started receiving texts. At first they were pretty harmless, calls for attention and begging me to meet in person. It then changed to very sexual texts, until eventually the messages became threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing out my family and friends' names and whereabouts, saying that he would get them involved unless I answered. Because they were texting me, I could see a displayed number, but when I called the phone providers they told me that the number couldn't be traced, and that it was probably a track phone. Great. I waited about 2 more weeks not responding to the texts, thinking that I shouldn't feed the troll. But eventually it became too much. I started getting upwards of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I would wake up to 10 to 20 texts every morning. I then decided to change my number altogether. The harassment stopped for a while, but sure enough, it started happening again. I called my phone provider asking if they ever gave out my number at a user's request, and they said that their policy stated that they wouldn't give out a number unless valid identification had been provided. Then one day, I tried logging into my Facebook, but was denied. Within a day, friends started contacting me, asking me what the hell I was doing, saying that they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mum who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told people what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation, and they helped me access my account again. At which point I just deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough. I decided to contact the FBI, explaining what had been going on for over a month now. They documented everything, but told me since I or any of my relatives were not in any immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At that point I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker, but I decided against it and just hoped that it would fade out if I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated and ignored any texts or phone calls. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received the occasional text, which always weirded us out. I hated that they got dragged into this, and one day, I came home and everything felt very eerie. Door unlocked, windows opened and no one home. A strong breeze was running through the apartment. I did a check of the place and found nothing else weird, so I locked everything up and just waited for my roommates to get home. It's been almost 7 months now. The calls and texts have more or less stopped. I get an occasional text, but at the very most 1 or 2 a week. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. It definitely affected my social/personal life. I became much more wary of the people around me and of my surroundings. I just felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until this stopped. Work was difficult, though I tried to maintain my composure as best I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps or websites. Things are now getting back to normal. I just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of the year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start in a new place. I'm not going to sit here and say that dating apps are dangerous and that no one should use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first. Skype, anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick close to your friends, and try meeting people in more traditional ways. Weird Tinder stalker? Let's not meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to the subscriber who submitted their story for this video. I've never used dating apps, but if you do, please remember to stay aware of who you're speaking to. I came across so many stories where people meet someone online who they think is perfect for them, and it always turns out to be a scam. If something or someone looks a bit too good to be true, most of the time, sadly, it probably is. So keep your wits about you when playing the game of love, so that we have one less horror story in the world. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe, as you won't want to miss what I have in store for you next. Remember that you, yes you, can submit your scary or paranormal story to my new official Reddit page, or send it over to my email, both of which can be found in the description. And feel free to follow me on Instagram and Twitter @TheMortisMedia for sneak peeks into what goes on behind the scenes. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.